in the state of presence, there's something there that is greater than the forms that appear in your life. Vaster, greater. That is why many people who realized this, realized it precisely when their life circumstances were very unfavorable, dreadful in fact. And suddenly they realized a deeper dimension of incredible power and aliveness, and they perhaps were surrounded by prison walls and barred windows. And suddenly they discovered incredible aliveness flooding their entire being. But they only got there because they reached a point of no longer running away from this moment that seemed so unacceptable. And nothing would be more normal than to run away from an unacceptable situation, run away from it internally. Try, if only fantasy world. If you can't get out of prison, at least you can create a fantasy world. So you're running away from it and you're resisting it and you're creating great unhappiness through resisting whatever is at this moment. And so those people, perhaps a prisoner, suddenly gave up the resistance to the now. Suddenly gave up trying to run to some mentally created future. When they let me out in 10 years, I'll be fine. And with the letting go of resistance to now came the liberation from external circumstances, inner liberation. And the liberation from the conditioning of the mind. And suddenly there was a peace, an alive peace. They're still in the same place. What's happened? Well, simple. They might not even have known it. What happened? You surrendered to this moment. You surrendered to life. You stopped saying no. That's what happened. It's simple. That's all. That's what happened. Is it that simple? Why didn't I do this before? My whole career as a criminal was unnecessary. I'm talking about the person in prison. Because even in his criminal activities, he was looking for himself, where he could never find himself. And he thought other people were obstacles to finding himself. Maybe he even killed somebody. Or he robbed banks. Surely if I have enough money, through that I will find myself. So that's what happened, and then it happened to some people with life-threatening illness, great unhappiness, and suddenly a shift. What happened? You said yes to this moment. Is that all? Maybe if I had done it 10 years ago, there would have been no illness. But it's never too late. And miraculous possibilities of transformation are there when you align yourself totally with this moment. If healing, in the case of somebody who is ill, if healing is possible at all, it'll happen. And I've seen many cases of people becoming healed through complete surrender to what is. This is not resignation. I'm not saying it is not the surrender that says, okay, I'll better resign myself to the fact that I'm ill and that I'm not going to make it. No, that's not it. There's a mental projection. There's a conceptual image of me as an ill person. And some egos hang on even to that. Because if nobody has given me much attention when I was healthy, at least now they're giving me attention. And some egos need that. It's the only way they can get some attention. All these doctors are giving me attention, these important people. It's working. I'm somebody. Not every illness is like that, but it is an aspect that you can often observe in certain people. So this is not the resignation that says, okay, I'm ill, there's nothing I can do. No, that's not. Surrender is you surrender to this moment, not a concept in your head that you resign yourself to. You surrender to what is at this moment. And what is it that is? Here I am. And there may be certain feelings. There may be a certain disability. There may be a certain pain somewhere in the body. It may even be an illness that you can't yet feel, and yet they've told you that you're very ill. But this is what is. There's the disability. I can't walk properly anymore, whatever the disability is, it is. This moment, not projecting myself and saying, okay, it's not going to change, you might as well accept that. That's future projection. Simply the isness of this moment. It is. And then you go from there, every moment. And I've seen occasionally people with serious disabilities that they've had for years, and I've looked into their eyes occasionally, and in some of them I saw great unhappiness and dreadful burden of having to live in that way, a very unhappy sense of self, very understandable that you should be complaining inside when all the people around you seem to be okay and fit and walking everywhere and you can't move without assistance. It's so understandable that you become an unhappy self. And then I've seen a few and looked into their eyes and see a light shining, an absence of an unhappy entity. They were simply looking. No complainer anymore inside. No complaining entity that says, why me? And so on, and builds an identity around the illness, the disability. There has been acceptance of the unacceptable, and the shift happened. Surrender happened. I saw this man, this is an interesting story, at when I was a graduate student. I never finished my graduate studies, but and transformation happened, and that was it. So the PhD never happened. But there was this man where I was used to go to eat every lunchtime at the university in the graduate center. They would wheel in a man in this wheelchair, and he was always surrounded by several people, and one person would get his food and another person would feed him because he couldn't move any limb, and another person had to hold up his head, and somebody else was holding a napkin under his chin, and then the food had to be put in his mouth. And when I first arrived there, I saw him, I asked, who is this? They said, he's a teacher. He teaches here, and he has this incurable illness, and they've given him 2 years to live. And these are his graduate students, and he could only produce croaking sounds, and there was always 1 or 2 people who could interpret what he was saying. And one day he came into the building downstairs, and I opened the door for him, and he came wheeling in his wheelchair, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I was surprised by the absence of unhappiness in him. There was no unhappy me there, just looking. And that was just a few seconds, and I saw there's something happened, he surrendered. And then I left the university, and many years later, maybe 10 years later, I saw at a newsstand the cover of Newsweek magazine, and there he was on the cover of Newsweek magazine in his wheelchair, and the headline said, "Master of the Universe." So he had become the most famous physicist in the world, and he was still around after they'd given him 2 years to live, 10 years before. And he produced creative thinking. His thought processes hadn't come to an end, no, not yet. But there was no longer a self associated with his thought processes. And then it was a miracle that somebody like that could make such a contribution. No complaining entity was left in him. He couldn't have survived if there had been a continuing conceptual sense of self complaining about the universe and itself. And then I read the interview in that magazine, and one thing he said there, I remembered one statement he made in the interview about his life, and he said, "Who could wish for more?" He now speaks through some mechanical device. Who could wish for more?